time for the bridge booty burner. We're gonna use 4 different glute bridges to unlock our hips and really activate those glutes. Everything is gonna be 30 seconds. We're gonna do 16 rounds through. We're gonna start with camel to really open everything up. And let's get started. So camel, feet are flexed, hands are on the heels, you're driving the chest out and up, you're squeezing those butt cheeks and you're coming back down. This doesn't have to be a fast bridge, guys. You can also do all of these for reps and set it for time. Okay, but we're really trying to extend the hips using those glutes. If this feels easy, you can always point your toes to get a little bit more of a stretch, okay? And if this feels like too much, you can always come to the bench and just sort of arch away, even turning your hands back to really open up those shoulders because you want to use it for the multi-purpose of really opening up your entire anterior chain. Then glute bridges, 30 seconds. Squeezing those butt cheeks, driving through the upper back and the elbows, driving the knees towards the toes. You're not just lifting, guys, and you're not just trying to bridge up as high as you can. A lot of times when we do that, we let our hamstrings take over or our low back. So get that posterior pelvic tilt as you lift. Think about driving those knees towards those toes, keeping everything in line, not letting anything fall open. And drive through that upper back too, so you're not just pushing yourself backwards. Good. Tabletop. So you're gonna put your hands behind, fingertips turned out, you're gonna bridge up. If you're less mobile, you might find you don't get up quite as high, and that's okay. Just trying to squeeze the butt cheeks. You can keep your chin slightly tucked or even relax your head back, but think about even opening up your chest as you do this. Really squeezing the glutes. I like to look down at my knees because it helps me maintain a little posterior pelvic tilt to make sure I'm not hyperextending my back because I want my glutes powering the move. I don't want to just get up higher for the sake of getting up higher and use my low back. Sit through to thoracic bridge. You're going to step through, bridging up, rotating. Step through, bridging up, rotating. And you'll see me sort of wiggling my fingers at the ground because I'm trying to think about rotating towards the ground as I'm lifting everything up. Because a lot of times when we rotate, right, we let the hip sag and that doesn't give us the full bang for the buck or our buck, as if we lift both hips up. So really lifting up, squeezing the butt cheeks. Good. Back to that camel. So again, feet are flexed, hands are on the heels, drive up and out, squeezing the butt cheeks. Taking your time with these guys. I think a lot of times we try and rush through and we forget about what muscles are working. So when you do this, think about squeezing the butt. If you can't reach your heels and you don't have a bench, put your hands here. Sit back, put your hands here, because by putting your hands here, you can open your elbows up to open up your chest, but you can also remind yourself to use your glutes to create the hip extension. You don't want to just arch your back as far as you can because you're going to hurt your low back, and the whole point of doing this is to prevent low back pain. So over into the glute bridge, squeezing those butt cheeks. Again, taking your time, driving through your upper back. You can think about driving those elbows down to the ground, think about driving those knees, poke those butt cheeks if you need. Make sure they're working. Get that little posterior pelvic tilt, so tilting and then lifting if you need. Think about driving the knees over the toes. All these little cues to make you focus on your glutes. And assess at the top. If you don't feel one, maybe squeeze a little harder, then squeeze the other one a little harder, and then come down. Don't be afraid to make the most out of each movement by slowing it down. Tabletop bridge. Guys, if you find you have a little bit more limited range of motion, you can always do a hip thruster off the bench. By doing this, you can still open everything up. You can still get that more tabletop position, but you don't need as much mobility out of your shoulders. So it's always an option. You want to make sure though that your knees aren't caving in, okay, because then your glutes aren't firing properly. You want to keep everything in line, really squeezing the butt up to drive that hip extension, even looking down at your knees to make sure, pushing the box backwards. Then guys, for the sit through to thoracic, you can always be here to start, okay? Always be here. This is a great option if you struggle to do the sit through part. It's still going to require more mobility and strength to bridge up on one hand, but it's always an option. And it's easier than having to do this where you're sitting through. It's a great place to start. You can also start with a glute bridge with overhead reach, which I can show you as well. But we'll do it next round. Camel again. So again, hands on the heels, driving up. I'm trying to open up my entire front of my body. Driving forward, squeezing the butt. You feel some burnage in those butt cheeks. If you don't, slow it down, assess, modify as needed. Flexing those feet, driving up and off. Using it as a stretch, but a stretch driven by your glutes for your hips. Good, glute bridge. So you're here, bridging up again. We can often contract our glutes harder with our own body weight, but it requires that mind-body connection. So we can't just go through the motions. You can't just be like, oh, Corey said 30 seconds, so I'm doing 30 seconds. Nope, you gotta be like, okay, but you squeeze and down, squeeze and down. Even thinking about that squeeze, squeezing a little harder at the top, thinking about trying to create shakeage, even with just your own body weight, it's gonna be key, guys. Good, so tabletop, bridging up. Trying to open that chest up, squeezing those butt cheeks. Again, you can look down at your knees to make sure that you're not hyperextending your low back. Because guys, if you feel any of these in your low back, you're not getting the most out of them. So modify. Don't just push through to do a harder variation. Make sure you're getting it to work, because the whole reason of doing these is to get the glutes activated. If they're not actually working or activating, you're kind of wasting your time. And if you do them correctly and you learn how to brace your abs, you're gonna get even more bang for your buck. Good, so the sit through to thoracic bridge, and I'll show you the very modified variation. If you need to start here, this will help you get a little spinal mobility. It'll help you get a little more unilateral focus activation. It's a great way to start with the sit through to thoracic. Okay, the overhead reach. Remember, you can also be here. This one's great. It's gonna get a lot of mobility work, a lot of bang for your buck in very little time. We're gonna do one more round through after this. So again, camel. Remember guys, you can be here, okay? Showing this variation, lifting up, opening the chest up. You can be here, sitting back, opening up. Whatever you're doing, you're making sure you're driving the hip extension with your glutes, you're not arching your low back. You can be here, okay? You can even point those toes, sit back. You can use a block instead if you need. You wanna find the level that's right for you so you can really open up the front of the body. I love this one. I feel the feet flex, helps me contract my glutes and get more out of it. Then glute bridge, squeezing those butt cheeks. Driving through that upper back. You should feel some shakeage starting. If you can't, squeeze harder. And remember, you can always hold the top, squeeze one, and then the other to make sure both are working. Because you might notice you have an imbalance and one side isn't firing as well. Get that posterior pelvic tilt and keep going. Good. Then tabletop. Remember, you're looking down at your knees. It's a little spinal flexion, guys. We are aware that it is a little spinal flexion, but it's a little spinal flexion to make sure that you have the posterior pelvic tilt and you're activating those glutes to drive the hip extension. Remember, you can also be here if it's too much on your shoulders or even too much on your wrists. And again, looking down at those knees to think about driving through the heels, think about squeezing those butt cheeks. Sit through to thoracic. Remember, you can be here, okay, bridging up, lifting up, doing the full variation, making sure both hips are up just as high. If one is dropping, guys, you can always modify by coming here. So just bridging up and reaching, bridging up and reaching, okay? You can also always be here with the glute bridge with overhead reach. Modify so you can get the most out of the movements. If you need, remember, come up to that sit through, to thoracic bridge. That is the bridge booty burner. Hope you guys enjoyed those 4 bridge variations to activate those glutes and unlock some tight hips.